All right, so we're going to try something a little bit different here with the setup. I don't know if I like it or not, but we're rolling with it. So I'm going to talk about Lightbringer today. For the most part, this is going to be a spoiler-free review of Book 5 of the Red Rising series, which is my current all-time favorite sci-fi series, especially ongoing sci-fi series. I mean, Sun Eater and this really compete for my heart. I think I like Red Rising a little bit more. It's just more my cup of tea. And as much of a gigantic sweeping space opera as it has sort of turned into, Pierce Brown just excels with his focus on his characters and the POVs that you get throughout the series, and really his emphasis on war and combat and just military fantasy sci-fi is impeccable, and that's why I love this series so much. So Lightbringer, Book 5, obviously, if you have never read any of the series, I have a video for you linked up above and in the description down below about why you should read the series. The original trilogy obviously being a single first-person present POV following Darrow and his Red Rising against the ruling class of the Golds. More on that in the video that I just mentioned. But this has expanded well beyond that, where not only did you have a time jump between the first 3 books and what is now the third of the next 4 books, it's a multi-POV story. It is a full-blown space opera spanning multiple moons, planets, basically just across space. So what Lightbringer does is it continues, obviously, the story of our main POVs that we've had from Iron, Gold, and Dark Age. I'm not going to spoil who lives or who dies or anything like that, so I'm going to keep it spoiler free as far as who I talk about in this until I get to some of the spoiler talk toward the end. But Pierce Brown does a fantastic job book to book of continuing the plot for each of these characters, giving each of the characters a unique voice, whether it's your main character of Darrow that you followed since the beginning, or a new character that was introduced in Iron Gold when you expanded beyond just the Darrow crew and immediate enemies, and you expand to having all of these different POVs from different walks of life that were either directly or indirectly affected by or involved with the war that's been happening. Lightbringer takes on a slightly less awful tone from Dark Age, where Dark Age is by far my favorite book of the series. It is a very dark book, heavily focused on the military aspect, the casualties of war, and everything that comes along with that. Lightbringer does that too, but it's not the entire time. This is not devoid of humanity or light, for lack of a better term. There is some hope in here, and he balances that really, really well. And I don't know what his initial intentions were for this book when it was going to be the conclusion. I never thought that he would be able to wrap up everything from Dark Age in one book, so it makes sense that he split it. But you do, I guess, feel that a little bit. This is sort of half of the finale, because there's some things that were really focused on heavily in Dark Age that are basically brushed to the side or put in the background of this to tell other stories that were going on. But this book wonderfully wrapped up a few of those plot points, so now we have time to let the other ones breathe in Red God whenever that comes out. And I'm incredibly excited to see the conclusion to this, because as much as I can predict certain things in the series happening and where I think potential plots are going to end up, Pierce Brown always proves me wrong and throws in a twist and turn there that I was not expecting, and I love that about his writing. Not only just the military focus and action of this series, which I think is where he truly excels, he always keeps you on your toes. And yes, he does use some of the same sort of tropes from book to book, or the same type of plot twists, where generally if something's going really well, you're just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop and for it to turn completely on its head. And that happens all the time in these books. It's always exciting though, and I love it. And that's why it doesn't really bother me, but you start to definitely understand sometimes it's like, this seems like this is a little bit too happy right now. Something awful has to happen. And usually it does. Aside from the twists and the turns that Pierce is so phenomenal at doing, he does something great in this book where not just the characters individually, there's a lot of great friendships and partnerships in this book, and tons of phenomenal scenes where you just get character interactions that you've kind of been wanting for several books. You get groupings and pairings that are kind of unexpected, and They drive the plot really well and make it incredibly entertaining at times and also very unsettling at times. And Pierce really does a fantastic job of intimate sort of one-on-one scenes in this book as well. And not just in dire circumstances, but sometimes happy circumstances. Whereas in Dark Age, there was no light at the end of the tunnel. There is in Lightbringer, and he does a fantastic job of balancing the grim, sort of terrible moments and parts of the war. And I mean, there are some atrocities in this book that are certainly catastrophic and unforgivable. And there's also really great moments of triumph in this book, which there were not a lot of in Dark Age. And I always think back to the quote that Pierce gave. I believe it was on his Instagram. I'll see if I can find it. When he ripped up the initial draft of this book, saying that it was too dark and he had to throw hundreds of pages out, I really want to know what was in those, because as dark as this book gets at times, it's certainly not Dark Age levels of dark. So if Lightbringer initially was going to be worse than that, dude, what was wrong? What I really enjoyed too, though, and hopefully we'll get the rest of the plot threads in Red God, is the way that he structured this, where it's in parts. So part 1, you're really focused on a specific area of the world and a battle and certain characters and people in play for that part of the book, and then you sort of shift to the next part of the book and then the next part. And he does a really good job of balancing screen time essentially for the characters in each of those respective parts. I do wish that some things that happened in part 1 or some characters that we were focused on got a little bit more time to breathe, but I feel like we're gonna get more of that in the next book when it all sort of comes back together, because there's a lot of things going on, lots of moving parts, lots of characters, lots of different locations happening. And it would be a gigantic book to try to fit that all in here, which understandably is probably why he ended up splitting it, because there's just too much to wrap up in one book. But I don't feel like it hurt the pacing at all. I think the pacing was fantastic. I love the moments of sort of downtime in between action in this, as well as the action, of course, because it's what he does best. His character moments and dialogue choices and just the way that he sets scenes is wonderfully written. He is fantastic at building tension. He does a great job of making you feel like you're almost watching a movie at times with how cinematic some of his set pieces are and his battles can be. And just the sheer scale of some of this is just amazing to think about and kind of hard to think about at the same time. Just the size of some of these ships, you know, obliterating a planet or bombarding a city. It would be so cool to see that. So I really hope he adapts this at some point. So, I mean, I could gush about this book for hours, and I probably will whenever we do our live chat. But honestly, like, I don't have many negatives of these books. I did initially in Red Rising. I didn't really dislike this book at all, outside of a couple of nitpicky things. Mostly just I wish that we had seen certain plot threads that seem to have been entirely dropped for this book that I assume will pick back up in Red God. Otherwise, it will make things that happen in Dark Age seem like they were kind of random. I don't expect that to happen. I feel like he has this planned out perfectly, and he's going to address all of those things in the finale book. But I'm looking forward to seeing what he does then and how this is all going to officially end, because I feel like all the pieces are in place. Everything is set up for what I assume will be, a final showdown or two in the finale in Red God. And I cannot wait. It's going to be epic. This entire series I'm in love with. It's brilliant writing. It's action-packed. The characters are heartfelt and lovable, even though most of them are monsters in one way or another. It's just a fantastic read, and this book was great. And last but not least, I'm going to jump into some quick spoiler thoughts. So if you don't want to be spoiled for anything in this book, please step away from the video now. Fuck Lysander. Fuck him in his stupid, smug face. He deserves a particle cannon directly through the top of his skull, through the bottom of his feet. He deserves every bit of pain imaginable for the shit that he does in this series, okay? Pierce Brown, you have written a fantastic villain, but oh my god, I want to punch a hole in his chest.